On this pair, I wanted to put some different buttons, and the precision was wrong, so I removed all the buttons, which will leave the original holes, and I made new holes further along and stitched on these flat buttons. The holes will still be visible, but hopefully they won't be too visible once the buttons are done up, as they might be covered by the edge here. And here is a pair that we're going to try and stitch some new buttons on. Now, if I was going to punch some new holes, I would just take my sharp awl. You would have to measure exactly what distance you want the buttons to be at. I recommend you try and follow the same line. So let's say I want my button to be about 1 centimetre in. So that's where I want them. And I'm going to punch, one hole and a second hole as a guide. I recommend that you try and only punch the top layer of the leather and not the lining, so that your buttons are sewn only through the top leather and not the lining. If you can't do that, no problem. It will just be less pretty on the inside, but it will work just the same. I'm just making the hole a little bit bigger to make it easier when I sew the buttons in. As you can see, I haven't punched through the lining. Now, the lining and the top layer are glued together, so you'll have to wiggle your way through to kind of lift the two layers apart. Once you have those hole guides, you can start stitching your buttons on. I'm using elastic thread in this case, which is my recommended choice, as it still allows you a little bit more give when you're going to do up your buttons. But if you do prefer to use a stronger thread, that's fine, especially if you're moving the buttons to your desired position. Just be aware that it's always better to leave a little bit of slack so that it's easier to do up the buttons when you are going to put these on. So same again, a little bit of wiggle as you thread your needle through those holes. You want to pull the thread through, knot it first, and then you're going to get your button. Oops. And sew it in. A little wiggle through the same hole and pull the thread through. Now, I recommend leaving a tiny bit of slack so that they're not flush against the leather, so that when you do up your buttons, you always have that little bit of give. I like to go through twice so that this, especially with this elastic thread, so that we offer the most resistance and durability possible. Now, as this is the first button, and we're going to, I usually stitch them in using the continuous thread all the way down. I might go around a third time to really make sure that this top button, which will get the most strain, is really, really strong. This elastic thread doesn't behave as well as sinew, but patience will do it. And here I'm going to do a little knot with our original knot, or just thread it through the knot. Actually, I'm just going to thread it through the knot so that it's caught and that this button stays nice and strong. To continue your line of buttons, then you just want to pop this thread underneath both holes through the layers of top leather and lining. So you see I'm not coming through to the other side, and go to the position of your next hole, which I should have punched earlier. I will do that now. It's really imperative that you mark exactly where the buttons are and that you respect the distances, which I'm not doing very well here, admittedly, but you really want the buttons to be in the right position so that when you do up the boots, it lays really nice and how it should be. So my needle is in between the layers of the top leather and the lining, and now I'm just going to pop it through to the next hole, pull out the needle, and the thread will follow, even though it's a bit tricky as this is the elastic thread that has a life of its own. But maybe you're a more skilled seamstress than I. And there you have it. Your first button is attached with a little bit of give. You can snip off the end, or I like to just burn the edge of the thread so that it's nice and tidy. And then you repeat the same process all the way down. You get your next button, pop it on through your hole, in, out. I'm not going through the lining. Okay. And I'm going to pop it through another time, and then back through the hole to our next position, which I haven't marked again. Let's do it here. I like to sew them like this using the same thread so that I don't have to knot each button. But if you prefer to sew them all individually and knot each time, that's up to you. Just make sure you do really nice strong knots that are not going to undo easily. And we have our button. Oops. And so forth and so on. There we are. That's the 3 first buttons attached. I would continue all the way down until I reach the bottom one, and on the bottom one I would knot it like I did the first top one, and maybe I would go 3 times through the shank to make sure that the top and the bottom one are super secure with a nice clean knot. And then there we are, we have it. Your new buttons are on. And yes, there will always be some holes, which is inevitable, but it might not show too much once your buttons are done up. And that's it. That's a short little video on how to change the buttons or replace the buttons on our button boots.